All right, let's dive into WPIL Limited. They're making waves in the pump industry. We've got a ton of info to go through, annual reports, financials, even some insights into their tech. We'll be looking at growth potential, their business model, financials, and the people running the show.
It'll be a fascinating look at a company that's keeping things, well, flowing in industries all over the world.
Exactly. To give you a quick overview, WPIL designs, manufactures, installs, and services pumps and pumping systems. And we're not talking about the kind you'd use for a pool float. These are industrial scale systems, the kind that power massive infrastructure projects.
Right, and they operate both domestically and internationally, which is interesting given the current global economy. WPIL themselves pointed out the war in Ukraine, the issues in the Middle East affecting the Suez Canal, and the rising interest rates. All these factors are contributing to a sense of caution in the market.
So, kind of an uncertain backdrop, but I'm guessing WPIL's work is even more important in times like these.
Absolutely. One thing WPIL emphasizes in their analysis is the potential for energy shortages and crises. With so many countries experimenting with different energy mixes, there's a real possibility of things, well, going wrong. That's where these reliable pumps and pumping systems come in. They're essential for so many vital industries.
It's like they're the unsung heroes, making sure things like water treatment and power generation keep running. So even with the uncertainty globally, it seems like WPIL is in a pretty strategic spot.
Definitely. Their services are indispensable, which brings us to another point WPIL raises, the trend of localization. More and more countries want to source their goods and services domestically. This could be both a challenge and an opportunity for a global company like WPIL.
Like a tug of war between global reach and local needs. Okay, so we've talked about the global context, but let's focus on WPIL specifically. What about their business model and their place in the industry?
Well, one thing that jumps out from their report is their dedication to innovation. They've put a lot into upgrading their testing facilities, including a new VFD that can test pumps up to 10 megawatts.
10 megawatts. That's like powering a small town with just one pump.
It's a big statement about what they're capable of and what they want to achieve. To understand their business, you need to look at their two divisions, the product division and the project division. The product division focuses on making those high-tech pumps, and the project division handles the large-scale infrastructure projects.
So a two-pronged approach, selling individual pumps and also taking on these massive projects. What kind of projects are we talking about?
Think water systems for cities, pumping systems for huge industrial operations, the kind of things that are essential for, well, modern life. And their annual report indicates they expect strong growth in these projects, especially in 2024 and 2025.
It sounds like they have a good balance of current projects and new opportunities.
Exactly. And they make money from both the product sales and the project work. It gives them some protection against market fluctuations.
So they're innovative, in a good position strategically, and have a dual revenue stream. But we can't forget about the bottom line. What about WPIL's financial performance?
Well, their financial statements tell an interesting story. Last year, their revenue was over 1,000 crore rupees. They've had consistent growth in revenue, and their profit margins are healthy. It shows they're managing costs well and pricing their products competitively.
1,000 crore.
Yeah.
That's impressive. But beyond the revenue, what about their overall financial health? Are they carrying a lot of debt? Do they have a ton of cash on hand? What's the situation?
Their balance sheet looks strong. They have a solid asset base, and their debt is manageable. Their debt-to-equity ratio, which is a measure of financial leverage, is only 0.18.
So they're not over-leveraged, not relying too much on borrowed money. That's good.
Exactly. And they have a good amount of cash on hand, which gives them flexibility to invest or handle any surprises.
So far, it looks like WPIL is doing well. They're innovative, strategically positioned, and financially sound. But we need to consider the people involved. Who are the people behind these numbers?
WPIL highlights their board of directors in their annual report. The board includes both executive and non-executive directors, which ensures a range of perspectives and experience. They also have a clear policy for appointing and compensating directors, which is good for transparency and accountability.
So good corporate governance.
Yeah.
They're thinking about responsible leadership, not just profits. What about their employees?
WPIL emphasizes their employees, saying that their people are key to their success. They seem to be creating a positive work environment and investing in training and development.
It's good to see a company that values its workforce. But realistically, every business has challenges. What risks is WPIL facing?
Well, they acknowledge that global instability is a major concern. Those factors we talked about earlier, the war, the Suez Canal issues, rising interest rates, all of those could create obstacles for trade and market access.
Right. And there's also the trend towards localization, which could complicate things for a company with a global presence.
Exactly. They're also concerned about the potential for energy shortages and crises, which could impact their customers and demand.
So they're dealing with a complex global landscape. How are they planning to handle these challenges and keep growing?
Well, their annual report outlines their plan for using their funds, and it's interesting. They're putting a significant amount, 70 crore rupees, into their general reserve. It shows they're focused on being financially prudent.
It's like building a financial safety net.
They're also investing a lot in research and development, working on new pump models and components. They're even developing pumps for naval ships.
Wow, naval ships. That's high tech.
They're not just sitting back.
Mhm.
And they're also continuing to improve their testing facilities with the latest equipment. All of this shows a commitment to innovation and a belief in their future growth.
Sounds like a solid plan. But what about their valuation? Are they a good investment?
That's where things get interesting. Their strong financials and ambitious plans definitely make them attractive to investors.
So WPIL might be a company worth watching.
Absolutely. If you're interested, I'd suggest checking out their investor relations materials, see if WPIL fits your investment goals.
Good advice. Before we move on, there's one more thing I want to touch on. Related party transactions. This can be a sensitive topic. What can you tell us about how WPIL handles these?
WPIL addresses this directly in their report. They know transparency is important when it comes to these transactions.
For those who don't know, can you explain what those are?
Sure. Related party transactions are basically dealings between the company and entities connected to them in some way. Subsidiaries, key personnel, even close relatives of directors.
So there's potential for a conflict of interest.
Exactly. That's why these need to be handled carefully and transparently. WPIL assures us they disclose all these transactions according to the accounting standards INDAS 24.
So they're following the rules and being open about it. Good to know. Now, I'm curious to dive deeper into their financials.
Let's do it. In the next part, we'll look at their profit and loss statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement in detail. We'll also break down some key financial ratios.
Stay tuned. We're going to get into the details of WPIL's numbers, but don't worry, we'll make it clear, engaging, and maybe even a little exciting. See you in part 2. Welcome back to our deep dive into WPIL Limited. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of their financials now. I know it can be a bit like trying to swim through a sea of numbers sometimes.
But no worries, we'll break it all down and find those little nuggets of insight because really, financial statements are just telling a story about how the company's doing.
Right, like a financial report card showing us their income and spending. And the difference between the two is their profit.
Exactly. And WPIL's profit and loss statement, or P&L, looks pretty good. They're showing consistent revenue growth and their profit margins are healthy. It means they're managing their costs well and pricing their products competitively. Remember that revenue number we mentioned earlier, over 1,000 crore rupees? That's all right here in the P&L statement.
Wow, it's one thing to hear it, but it's another to actually see it right there in black and white. Okay, so the P&L is looking good, but what about their balance sheet? That's where we see their assets and liabilities, right?
You got it. The balance sheet is basically a snapshot of what WPIL owns, their assets, and what they owe, their liabilities. At a specific moment in time, it gives us a sense of their financial strength.
Like a financial selfie.
Exactly. And WPIL's balance sheet selfie looks pretty strong. They have a solid asset base, over 88 crore rupees. A large chunk of that is tied up in property, plant, and equipment. Which makes sense. They are a manufacturing company after all.
Right, they need those factories and machinery to make the pumps. What about the other side, the liabilities? Are they overloaded with debt?
Not at all. Their debt levels are very manageable. Their debt-to-equity ratio, which basically measures how much debt they're using compared to equity, is only 0.18. That's a very healthy ratio. It shows they're not too reliant on borrowed money.
So no risky financial Jenga. That's a relief. Is there anything specific on the balance sheet that we should look at closely? Any red flags or hidden gems?
One thing worth pointing out is their cash and cash equivalents. This is basically the money they have readily available for day-to-day operations, investments, even paying off debt.
So like their financial gas tank.
Exactly. And their tank's looking pretty full. They have a good amount of cash on hand. It gives them flexibility and helps them weather any financial storms.
Okay, so the P&L shows strong performance and the balance sheet looks good. Now, what about the cash flow statement? I have to admit, this one always confuses me a bit.
I get it. The cash flow statement can seem complicated, but really it's just tracking how cash moves in and out of the company. It shows us where the money's coming from and where it's going.
Like following the money trail.
Exactly. And it's really important. It tells us if WPIL is generating enough cash to cover expenses, invest in growth, and pay off debts. It's all about sustainability.
So is WPIL managing their cash well?
Their cash flow statement shows they have a healthy amount coming in from their core operations, which is a good sign. It means they're making money from their main business activities. However, they are investing heavily in the business, which uses up some of that cash.
So they're spending money to make money, putting their cash to work for future growth.
Exactly. They're investing in things like those upgraded testing facilities we talked about and developing new pump models. It's a balance, making sure they have enough cash available while also investing for the future.
Right, you can't just sit on a pile of cash, you have to use it.
Right.
Okay, so we've looked at the three main financial statements, the P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow. What else can we learn from these numbers?
Well, to dig a little deeper into WPIL's financial health, we can look at some key financial ratios. These help us compare WPIL to other companies in the industry and get a sense of their overall financial strength.
Okay, let's talk ratios. What should we be looking at?
One of the most common ones is the current ratio. It measures a company's ability to pay their short-term obligations, those bills that need to be paid within a year.
So do they have enough cash on hand to cover those immediate expenses?
That's it. It compares their current assets, things they can easily turn into cash, to their current liabilities, those short-term debts.
So a higher ratio is better. More assets to cover the debts.
Generally, yes. WTIL has a current ratio of 1.51, which is very healthy. They have more than enough assets to cover their short-term liabilities.
So they're not going to be scrambling for cash anytime soon. What other ratios are important?
The debt-to-equity ratio, which we talked about earlier, remember, this shows how much debt they're using compared to equity.
Right, it's about how much leverage they're using. And we know WPIL's ratio is low, which is good.
Exactly. It suggests they're using a conservative amount of debt and relying more on equity financing, which is generally safer.
So they're not building their business on a mountain of debt. Are there any other insights we can get from these ratios?
Their return on equity, or ROE, is another important one. It tells us how effectively they're using shareholder money to make profits.
So it's about keeping their investors happy. A higher ROE means they're doing a good job with that money.
Right, and WPIL's ROE is pretty healthy. It shows they're using their shareholders' investments well.
So far, it sounds like WPIL is in great financial shape. Strong performance, good ratios, responsible debt management. But you mentioned related party transactions earlier. Can you remind us why those matter and what we should be looking for?
Sure. Related party transactions are those dealings between a company and entities connected to them in some way, like subsidiaries, management, even close relatives of those in leadership positions.
Right, and the concern is that these transactions might not always be in the best interest of the company or its shareholders.
That's it. There could be a conflict of interest. So transparency is really important. WPIL addresses this in their annual report, saying they disclose all related party transactions according to IND-AS 24. IND-AS 24 is the Indian accounting standard that deals specifically with these disclosures. It's a set of rules to make sure these transactions are reported openly.
So they're following the guidelines, but where do we find the details about these transactions? Are they hidden somewhere in the financial statements?
Not hidden, but you do need to know where to look. The details of WPIL's related party transactions are in the notes to the financial statements, specifically Note 46. That's where you'll find what the transactions were, how much money was involved, and the relationships between the parties.
So those notes are important for anyone who wants to really understand WPIL's financial dealings.
Absolutely. The main statements give you the big picture, but the notes provide crucial details and context.
Okay, so we've gone deep into WPIL's financials. We analyzed their performance, looked at their ratios, and even explored those related party transactions. It's been fascinating.
And it all points to a very positive picture of their financial health. They're clearly well managed, with a good track record and a bright future.
But we're not done yet. In the last part of our deep dive, we'll focus on WPIL's recent quarter results. We'll get a snapshot of their latest performance and what it might mean for their future. Welcome back to our deep dive into WPIL Limited. We've covered a lot, haven't we? Exploring their technology, their position in the industry, and those impressive financials.
Yeah, we've looked at a lot, and now we're going to zoom in on their most recent quarter results. It's like a fresh snapshot of how they're doing.
Like getting a sneak peek at what's next for them.
So what's the latest news from WPIL? Are they still doing well?
The recent quarter results are definitely encouraging. They're showing continued growth, and they're still profitable. It all lines up with their positive outlook for the year ahead.
That's great to hear. It seems like they're really hitting their stride. But we did talk about how they're operating in a pretty complex global environment. All those risks, the geopolitical stuff, the potential energy problems could definitely cause some issues for them. Right. You're absolutely right. No business is completely immune to those external factors. And WPIL, even though they're doing well, they need to be able to adapt to all the changes happening globally.
It's a good reminder that even the most successful companies can't just sit back and relax. They have to be constantly looking ahead, trying to anticipate challenges and adjust their strategies.
Exactly. It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
So we've looked at WPIL from all angles, their industry, their business model, financials, leadership, even those potential risks.
We went through their annual reports, looked closely at their financial statements, and zoomed in on their most recent quarterly results.
But what does it all mean for our listeners? Why should they care about WPIL and their story?
That's the big question, isn't it? This deep dive has hopefully given you a better understanding of this company. And it's a company that plays a vital role in our world, whether you're thinking about investing or just want to understand the pump industry better. Or maybe you just appreciate innovation. WPIL's story has some valuable lessons.
They're not just financially successful. They're committed to good corporate governance, they care about their employees, and they're trying to navigate all those complex global issues we talked about.
Their story shows how important it is to be adaptable and resilient in today's world.
It reminds us that businesses, like people, need to be able to change course, to take on new challenges, and find creative solutions to survive and thrive.
And maybe the biggest takeaway is that WPIL's story is still being written.
Exactly. Who knows what they'll come up with next? What new markets will they enter? What kind of impact will they have on the world?
It just shows you that the business world is always changing. It's dynamic and full of possibilities.
And that's what makes it so interesting to explore. So there you have it, our deep dive into WPIL Limited.
We've broken down their operations, analyzed their financials, and thought about their future.
We hope you enjoyed this journey as much as we did.
And we encourage you to keep learning about them. Maybe check out their website, read their investor relations materials, or just follow their progress.
Because WPIL is definitely a company to keep an eye on. Until next time, stay curious and keep those learning gears turning.